welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most interesting topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 185th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it's our 640th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, September 3rd, 2020. I'm your host, Andy Bottoms. And I am already messing up. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
No, the banner moments are getting harder and harder to come by as we move through the offseason. So the best we could come up with this time was Andy Katz today, I believe it was, tweeted out a list of his top 20 returning players in college basketball, and Trayce Jackson-Davis was in there at number 16. So I think as we look forward to the season, we know that Trayce is really going to be the anchor that everything is built around. And if you want to have a successful team, it's always good to have a stud guy who's coming back, who's got some experience, and that everybody can really lean on from both an offensive and a defensive perspective. So that is certainly the positive news. Some might say a little bit of the shine comes off that news when you look at other portions of the list. I know Jared singled out the fact that Geo Baker of Rutgers was at number 9 on the list. Seth Towns from Ohio State was number 12 in his first year in the league. And then you did have actually the top two players were both also from the Big Ten, so Luka Garza and Ayo Dosunmu. So I think not a lot of complaint about those two. Kofi Coburn also in at number 10. The Geo Baker one probably the one that was a little bit head scratching, I would say, in a number of ways. But we'll focus more on the positive of Trayce being on that list. I think that bodes well for IU's prospects heading into the season. And as we'll talk about in some of the headlines later, there continue to be, while maybe some different things that we'll be looking forward to this year, things do seem to be slowly moving forward toward actually having a season. So having Trayce in the middle of that is something that we can all get excited about. So with that, let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left.
He remembers the days when a movie cost $1. Heaven help you if you ever decide to pop your collar. Play hard, but remember, fake hustle is a crime. He's the coach and it's Tonsoni time.
Coach, what's on your mind tonight?
Well, you know, as everyone knows, I'm not much for Instagram pictures and everything of workouts and all of those things, but two pictures as we were awaiting the start of the season kind of cropped up. Anthony Leal flexing and muscling up his new toned body from Cliff Marshall is good to see. Not so much the picture, but just to understand that our guys are back working. Every university's doing it, but I think our guys with Coach Marshall really do a great job at getting ready for the season, and that has to play out on the court, obviously. And then the freshmen were also, at the grocery store talking about eating proper diet. So they're getting ready for the season. We need to get ready for the season, and our fans in the chat mob, everyone needs to get ready for the season because it sounds like there is a chance. And the other thing that I was interested about is, unfortunately, moving the Maui Classic to North Carolina and not in Hawaii. I know that's bad for our buddy there, Ryan, but if they can have some sort of tournament, that's good for getting some non-conference games. So nothing definitive yet to really get excited about in this day and age, but enough to keep you happy, I guess.
And to my right.
Analyzing players, finding every wrinkle. He hasn't ever hosted, never lifted a finger. He's got all the
Well, let me quickly add just one thing about this.
Dude just interrupted his own jingle.
So, Ryan, I have a feeling that the possible discussion of the Maui Invitational being held in Asheville, North Carolina, that Coach just alluded to, may be your rant about sports from the past week. But feel free to go in a different direction if you'd like.
You know me too well, buddy. If the Maui Invitational is in Asheville, North Carolina, I mean, come on. just cancel the tournament, put these teams on the back of next year's teams, put them in 2022 and let them go back. Why are we moving it to Asheville, to the Harrah's Cherokee Center in Asheville, North Carolina? What do we, no, we're doing it in Maui. That's where we're doing it. Beaches. There are no beaches in Asheville. I feel bad for the players who got hyped for, to go to Maui and wind up having to go to the middle of nowhere in North Carolina. I get why, but just cancel the tournament for a year and bring it back. I'm going to Maui. I don't care what anyone else does. I'm going to Maui. I'll cover the tournament from distance in Maui, from like 6 hours away or whatever it is. I'll do that. But you guys go have fun in North Carolina while I go to Hawaii. But I think that they should just cancel the tournament, and that Maui Invitational should just stack these teams on the back of the next field, because the field is already set for 2021. So just stack these teams on the back of that and let these kids go. Because the thing is, if you participate in the tournament, you have to wait like 4 years until you can go back. And so, some people have been looking forward to this for real time. By some people, I mean me. And you're just moving it around. No. It was a rough day in the Phillips household. Let's just say that.
Yeah, that's it'll be interesting to see if that actually plays out as the way to do it. We'll talk about a little bit more about that in a second. So with that, this week we're going to talk about a few different things. We've got Hoosier headlines. We've actually got a number of things that fall into that section. Then in the main segment, we'll talk about who the most indispensable, easy for me to say, Hoosier is besides Trayce Jackson-Davis. And then we'll answer your questions to finish up, as we always do. All of that coming up this week on Assembly Call Radio. And before we get to all of that, a quick announcement. Please continue to support our friends at Home Field. You can go to homefieldapparel.com and use the promo code Assembly20 at checkout. They've been doing a great job of launching a number of new schools, including the Colorado School of Mines, which was this past weekend. Now, this upcoming weekend, based on the not so subtle hints that they've dropped, it looks like Syracuse will be the team. So they've been too supportive of the show for me to encourage a boycott of this big new Saturday reveal of Syracuse, a team that most recently has not made fond memories for IU fans. So perhaps in a way to combat that, I would encourage you to buy IU apparel on that day to maybe offset the what's going on with the Syracuse piece of things. So again, all joking aside, Connor and everybody there is just tremendous. Super comfortable shirts that are a regular part of my work from home wardrobe at this point. So, again, use promo code Assembly20 to save 20% off when you go to homefieldapparel.com. All right, guys. So with that, Hoosier headlines. Kenya Hunter, the hire that was you guys discussed last week on the show, was confirmed this week. Had statements from both he and Archie Miller. So that is official news, which I think is not surprising to anyone at this point. But anything you've kind of heard even since last week is, more information has come out as they've interviewed more people talking about the addition of Kenya Hunter. It seems like he's already paying some dividends on the recruiting trail in terms of getting some East Coast guys interested that have subsequently received scholarship offers. But, Ryan, any kind of newfound things that you've come across on Hunter since last week?
The only thing is, I talked to somebody with the program who just said that he's going to fit perfectly, and he's exactly what they needed. That was the thing that stood out to me. It was just it was the phrase exactly what we needed, and I didn't really get too elaborate. Didn't get him to elaborate on that, but it just seems like he's a guy who fits in really well. Is, as you said, going to have some recruiting ties, but also is a pretty decent coach on the floor. And is good at, analyzing things and being analytical about the game and understands the game. As some guys are hype men and recruiting guys, and some guys are, on court cerebral coaches, and he's got a little bit of both of that. So I think that's the positive here, is he can kind of do a lot of things for you. And yeah, any boost in the recruiting game is always going to help, especially when it's out of the region. I know obviously Indiana wants to build inside out, but it always helps to be able to go poach somebody from across the country if you can. So that is something that they certainly lost with Bruiser Flint leaving. So I think that it's a natural fit to have another guy who can go out and do that.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I was on the show last week and so didn't get to talk a whole lot about him. But the more that you read, to me, what stands out is a little bit of what you alluded to, Ryan, is that he seems pretty well rounded in terms of of roles he can fit on the staff, which I think is what you want. And it's clearly a guy based on Archie's comments that he's really comfortable with, which Coach, I think you alluded to last week. So I think, you don't really know. You don't really know about any of this stuff right out of the gate, but I think there's a lot of positive signs with him. And like I said, the recruiting pieces, a number of guys that they made offers to this week made reference to their previous contact with him and a comfort level with him. So I think that's a positive. Coach, so we've gotten Ryan's thoughts about Maui potentially being played in Asheville. So former Wake Forest coach Dave Odom is the tournament chairman. He said that they're considering a number of options, but they have every intention of hosting the 8-team tournament. Stanford being in the Pac-12 is a potential stumbling block, of course, given the Pac-12 stance to not play non-conference games before the first.
Andy, I've got some breaking news as we're recording this.
Okay.
OG Anunoby just hit a buzzer-beating three-pointer to give the Toronto Raptors a playoff win over the Boston Celtics.
Wow. Just right there. Amazing. Breaking news.
Boom.
Here.
Breaking news. And he walked nonchalant back towards the bench. Never jumped up and down. Yeah, total OG. It was awesome.
I look forward to the post game interview with OG that will certainly shed a lot of light on his emotions and feelings after the shot.
They passed me the ball and I shot the ball. And,
no, that was too long. You said too many words. He would not. He wouldn't be that wordy. So the Stanford thing is one potential hiccup. Odom said we're certainly not sitting on our hands. We want to make sure we have a tournament. That's the only goal. And kind of related to that, the NCAA Oversight Committee, they're eyeing a November 25th start date. They had a few dates that they had thrown out. They talked about that one. Who knows whether, I think that start date brings some questions up. If you look at a school like IU, that's around the time students are going home for a pretty prolonged period of time. So would you try to play conference games then? What do you do with these non-conference tournaments? So Coach, what are your thoughts on not necessarily just Maui, but maybe what, if anything, some of these tournaments are going to be able to do to try to still play?
Yeah, a couple things. One, I think the teams that signed up to go to Maui deserve to go to Maui. And maybe there's 2 tournaments at one time or back-to-back next season because, the fan bases and all that have geared up to go. So I think that's a trip for your program that you plan and can only go so every so often. From a basketball standpoint, I do think that there needs to be some non-conference games so that you can have a really good selection come tournament selection time. And the question is going to be, by pushing back 2 or 3 weeks, how many of those non-conference games can you get in? I've seen all kinds of conversations about whether it's the Maui Invitational just moving or getting a group of 8 or 16 teams together in a bubble situation somewhere to play some non-conference games. I think that's a good idea, and I would assume that given not to put too many games in one short time period, that a lot of programs would be interested in getting going before they get into the conference season. I think it's extremely tough to just start out, especially in your tougher conferences. The Big Ten, if you open up on November 25th and you're at Wisconsin followed by Michigan State at home and don't get a chance to get out on the court, I think that's very tough. So I think it's interesting to try to get these tournaments played in some fashion. From a fan standpoint, I'd like to see the Maui stuff go on as scheduled either in 2021 or 2022.
Yeah, I think the odd thing is what you said. The November 25th date gets thrown out. The question at that point really becomes, are you just lopping off the first 2 weeks of the season and kind of picking up what you thought you would do from that point? Are you just backing everything up 2 weeks and you're still going to do everything that you did? Or is it just the only given is conference games and then you're trying to figure out how you can schedule non-conference games around those, after those, whatever that might look like? I just think there are a lot of variables on it. And it sounds like, I'm reading a lot of the same things that you are, that people are exploring any and all options to try to figure out how to do that. Selfishly, from a bracketology standpoint, I think we both probably come at this from the same place of figuring out, those non-conference games really do a lot to establish, conference rankings and supremacy and all those things, and really does a lot to let teams evaluate themselves against others. So that is a big part of the selection process. If all or some conferences opt to only play conference games, that makes that inherently more difficult. And so I think that's a question mark. Ryan, anything you're kind of reading or hearing at this point that that suggests there's anybody who actually has a distinct idea of what this might look like, or is it all just everybody's putting their cards on the table and then trying to figure out what might work best from there?
Well, what keeps happening, to use the card analogy, is you have a great hand maybe developing, and then you know, the flop is terrible for you, and you have to readjust what you're doing and readjust your expectations. And that sort of is what's going on here. And people have things locked in, and then, you know, 1,000 kids at a college, you know, test positive, and you have to reassess what you're doing. You know, I mean, that's just, and guess what? That's probably going to happen throughout the fall. And there are going to be these reassessments. I think what baseball has been going through is the best example. There have been times they've had to shut teams down for a couple weeks, you know, or 10 days, and then try and make up games. I think that is the new reality we are dealing with. And so whatever these conferences say is going to happen, whatever the Maui Invitational says is going to happen, we don't know if that's actually going to be the case. So, you know, everyone's making their best laid plans, and then we'll just see how it all falls out. But what I think is going to happen, I think we're definitely going to get a full conference season somehow. And any other games other than that, I think we have to kind of count our lucky stars if we get any. And you know, whether it's 5 or 6 or whatever, I don't think we're going to get a full slate, though. I just don't feel like that's going to happen. I know it's easier to sort of contain basketball teams than it is football teams, and it's probably easier to control them and keep an eye on them. You know, it's 12 guys versus 100 essentially. So you might have more success with basketball, but I do think we're going to keep pushing and pushing back and see what happens.
Yeah, I think that a lot of it boils down to, you know, does the NCAA really care that March Madness takes place in March? You know, they trademark the battle in the bubble or whatever that was. I think just trying to, you know, prepare for different options. But if the fact that you want to get it done, you know, they want the championships to be held in March doesn't really matter to you at that point, which I don't know that it really does or should. They want to hold the tournament because there's a lot of money. Then so what? Yeah. But I think that really boils down to you can't really set yourself up to try to play a super condensed season, because then, to your point, you've got outbreaks and then you've got games that you're going to struggle to reschedule and probably not going to reschedule. And then how do you really handle that from a tournament selection process? And so you've got to leave yourself enough buffer where if games get canceled or delayed, you've gave yourself some room to actually play them before you go into that. So there's just a lot of contingency things to start to work out, but it's a positive that they're planning, which is more than you can say about college football. So I think that part is positive, and that there's some preparation taking place. It's just a matter of, I think you're going to hear every idea under the sun between now and, you know, a couple weeks before it starts to try to figure things out. But I'm glad they're thinking about it as opposed to not. So I'll take what I can get. The other thing we had here was 247 updated their rankings for some IU targets and commitments. A few notable ones. Aminu Muhammad is now a 5-star. Trey Kaufman up 9 spots to number 31. Logan Duncombe rose 12 spots to number 63. Mason Miller dropped 12 spots, and Blake Wesley dropped 12 spots. He's outside of the top 100 at this point. Coach, any of these moves mean much to you at this point, or is it just kind of something fun to look at and talk about because we don't have much else?
Well, you know, I'm not much for rankings because it's all about fit into a program. Obviously, your top 100 are players that are going to be really solid players, and then you go from 100 to 150 are players that can come in and contribute right away, but really are 2 or 3 year development guys. You look at them in bunches as opposed to numbers. So the drops, to me, Mason Miller's drop does not, make me want Mason Miller any less. The key is, to me, is going to be Trey Kaufman. Would love to see him. IU, I heard that he's taking an unofficial, can't even take an unofficial, but his parents are driving him down to see Virginia and North Carolina campuses. So there might be, that might be all that they can do before they're going to want to make a decision. But I think Trey Kaufman is the one everyone kind of wants to see come to Indiana. It's nice to see him jump up 9. The guy that's already committed, Logan Duncombe, I think is just going to get better and better and better. I have friends who coach against him in the Cincinnati area, and they keep talking about his motor, and that's all that I really need to hear. Blake Wesley's the interesting one. You hear a lot of people excited about him. He looks good, and then you hear sometimes that maybe the schools are backing off a little bit, and so you never know why. But then all of a sudden he drops 16 points, so that's one to watch going in the other direction. And you just kind of watch directions of these things at this point. I think at least what we can do from a fan standpoint.
Yeah, I think to your point, rankings aside, it's good to see Kaufman, but he's really going to be the domino that I think leads to whatever other directions that IU goes. But positive to see a guy they already have in the fold in Duncombe, and a guy that they've gone as hard after as anybody in Kaufman be guys that are rising on that list. So, all right, with that, we'll wrap up Hoosier headlines. And coming up, one of the college basketball preview magazines was released, and an IU player was on the cover, but it's not the one you might have expected, which got us thinking, who are the 2 to 3 most indispensable Hoosiers on next year's roster? We'll talk about it next on the Assembly Call.
Hey, this is Max Bielfeldt, Big Ten champ and Better Than Advertised Sixth Man of the Year in 2016. And speaking of Better Than Advertised, join Jared, Andy, Ryan, and Coach on the Assembly Call after every IU basketball game. Go Hoosiers.
All right, thank you, Max, and welcome back to the Assembly Call. You can find all of our content at our website, assemblycall.com, and if you ever want to join the chat mob during our unedited live broadcasts or watch those replays and see all the between-segment banter, then check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/assemblycall. I'm Andy Bottoms here with the coach, Brian Tonsoni, and Ryan Phillips, and this week started to see some of the college basketball preview magazines. Lindy's released their cover for the Big Ten. All these do regional ones or conference related ones. So they released their Big Ten cover. And so on the cover, you've got Travion Williams of Purdue, Prentice Hub of Notre Dame, Butler's Bryce, and I think it's Enzi. And then IU, they had not Trayce Jackson-Davis, which probably most people would think, but it was Al Durham. So that led to a bit of a discussion in our IU basketball community, our discussion community, about who the 2 most indispensable Hoosiers on this year's roster are. So if you could guarantee that 2 IU players would be available and healthy for every game this year, who would you pick? The first one is obviously Trayce. But the question that becomes interesting is who the second guy would be. So if you look at this year's roster and what each guy brings to the table, who are the other, who's the other IU player that IU could least afford to lose? And so I think there's some good debate here. So Jared put his thoughts in, so I'll share his first. He said Al, but I think the interesting part is that this is actually a discussion. I think I fall more in the camp that it bodes well as opposed to it bodes poorly. That you don't really know who that other guy would be. So Jared said Al. He among the things he listed were he's the senior leader. Team's best outside shooter and free throw shooter. Emerged as a guy late in the season who would take and make big shots. Best combo of scoring outside and getting to the rim. Had the number 2 in free throw rate in Big Ten play. And the most important thing for Trayce is to be able to have room to operate. And so you need to be able to spread the floor. And so that makes Al really important because he's a guy who can do that on a team with not a lot of proven shooters. And in summary, he basically said there's no great replacement for the offensive skills that Al brings to the table, even if there's some lulls defensively. So, but he's got 3 seasons in the system, and that is also of great importance. So Jared's vote was for Al. So Ryan, I'll throw it to you first. Do you fall in the camp that it's Al? Do you immediately just fall back to Race Thompson, which everyone would assume that you would answer? I guess maybe let's talk Al a little bit first. Are there arguments maybe to be made against some of the points that Jared made, or how do you come down on his reasoning for Al being the next most important guy?
Well, the question is there anybody that can replace what Al does? And when he's right, I think Rob Finney can do some of the things, but Rob Finney's career has been so up and down, and I know that he's not reliable or whatever, but when he's been right, he can replace the things that Al does. He can make big shots. He can get to the rim. He can run the offense, set the tempo, do things like that. The thing is, he's just less consistent with it. But I think that if you're looking at what players can do things that other guys can't, I'd say Jerome Hunter. He's a consistent 3-point shooter. When he's if he's going to be healthy, if we're talking 100% health, Jerome Hunter, not minutes restriction Jerome Hunter, not he can only play 6 minutes at a time and then come back in or whatever. We're talking full go healthy Jerome Hunter adds more to this team, I think, than anybody else because of his ability, because of his size on offense and his ability to get off a shot, B, his ability to post up at times and score in there. If you watch the summer highlights that were posted or the offseason highlights that were posted of him, he can do some different things. And I think he was an emerging defensive guy. I don't think he's ever going to be a great defender, but I think he's solid, whereas Al gets lost in one-on-one situations a lot. I think it's Jerome Hunter because of what he adds offensively to this team. This defense has gotten better and better and better every year. I think that Jerome Hunter's offense that he adds would really help this team. And if he's hitting threes, it spreads the floor and opens everything else up for everybody else.
Coach, what about you?
Yeah, I think Ryan brings up a great point in this discussion is who can replace the player. And Armaan Franklin is a guy that could also step in and do some of the things that Durham can't. What you have in Durham to support Jared is that senior leadership, that guy who's been in Cook Hall, who is known to be a hard worker and a leader.
Those and he wants to take big shots.
Yes,
too.
Those are intangibles that would make him hard to replace if he went down or wasn't there. So that's where Jared's coming from, and I agree. Then the two players, according to Ryan, who can't you replace easily, I think Jerome is that guy, and I think Race Thompson is that guy because there's not a whole lot of depth in the post position. Yes, you have Joey Brunk, but Race can bring more athleticism, the ability to maybe shoot a little more we've talked about in the past. So, the not ready to be replaced direction is Jerome and Race. But I will go back and say that I think Rob Phinisee is probably the second most important player, for his running the offense and ball handling. And yes, that can be replaced by Lander, but his ability to lock down other point guards. He has had his way with Cassius Winston the last 3 games, and though that is what he can do when healthy and when playing consistently. That the defensive side, we sometimes we all look at it, but sometimes that's easy to miss is the impact on defense, and so I think Rob Phinisee has to be in this discussion as well as Jerome and Race and Al, and obviously the second guy's going to come from your starters, and that's probably the other 4 starters. So I don't know that I've made any clear message, but to me it's Rob Phinisee simply because junior point guard. Really, we've played better when he was healthy. Indiana under Archie Miller has played a lot better than when he hasn't been, and so that makes him indispensable.
And he'd be my second pick. I'd also say that with Christian Lander, if Al goes down and isn't healthy, between Christian Lander and Armaan Franklin, you probably have a replacement there, for the things that Al can do and that he's best at. I think that Rob Phinisee would be my second pick after Jerome.
Yeah, I think the Jerome thing is interesting. I think the one thing that didn't get mentioned with him is if he plays as well and shoots the ball well and can defend it at that level, I think what he allows you to do is provides a level of lineup versatility that maybe other people don't. In terms of, we've thrown around the idea of could he be a small ball 4 type guy. I don't know whether that's true, but he's the one guy who probably who feels like he could maybe unlock that kind of lineup. So I think that part with him is important. I tend to fall a little bit more toward the Phinisee side of this. And, the other guys that we had listed, we've really touched on all of them. Lander's the one we've gotten into the least depth on, so we'll get to him in a minute. I think with Phinisee, just to have somebody be able to run the show capably. I know there's been questions about can he push the pace and play at the pace that Archie wants to, and I think that's been a struggle for him, and I don't know how much injuries have factored into that over the course of time. I go back a little bit to what Coach said of, when he's really been right and locked in and played well, you think of the beginning of that Ohio State game last year where he really was shooting the ball well, and even that was after he had struggled a little bit with injury, got off to a good start, was able to do, shoot the ball well, has been a proven defender that he's shown at times. I think those things become really important in a guy who can run the show. I think if you look at, indispensable, kind of like you said, other guys who can do what he can do, maybe Christian Lander can do that, but we've never seen him we've never seen him actually do it at the college level. And there's questions about what that means to jump to the, this level. He's obviously incredibly talented. So you would like to think that he's going to fit in seamlessly, but other point guards in the, who have reclassified and done similar things, it hasn't been a smooth transition. So you don't ultimately know whether somebody could. And, point guard play has been an issue for this team over the last handful of years, really since Yogi was gone, quite frankly. And, so I tend to fall a little bit more in the fantasy camp. But let's kind of circle on Lander. I mean, do you guys think he really belongs in this conversation, or do we just not know enough to be able to say, hey, nobody else can do what he can do? Coach, I'll throw that one to you first.
We haven't seen it at the college level yet, but it would not surprise me that a few games into the season, and we have this discussion again, that Christian Lander becomes the second most indispensable guy on the team. Reports out of workouts and practice are that he's picking up, the stuff really, really quick. He is buying in to what's going on, has been a great teammate, a great worker inside the program. That's what I'm hearing from people who are on the inside, that he's really playing well. Now, you got to do that against older guys and scouting reports and all of that. It's not, there are workout guys and then there are game guys. Guys that look good in workouts don't always necessarily make it on game night. So I don't think we can talk about him right now because we just haven't seen him, and his youth is an issue. Obviously, losing a year of high school basketball and coming early. But, man, if he is a 5-star point guard and can play with some quickness, and what they're saying is his ability to make stuff, happen off the screen and roll, which puts we were talking about it in the break about the NBA, when you got 4-on-3 and that ball can move. I would not be surprised if Christian Lander would become that, especially if he can guard.
Yeah, Ryan, what are your thoughts on Lander and kind of where he sits in this part of the discussion?
Well, he does things that guys on this roster can't do, as far as just his ball handling and his ability to beat people one-on-one and his vision to break things down. I mean, Rob Finnessy's a fine point guard when he's right. Christian Lander's on another level. He just is. The question is the transition to college basketball. How long is that going to take? Can he do that right away as a young kid in college basketball? We don't know that because everybody's adjustment to that college game is different. And so we don't know what a young kid coming in early is going to be able to do as a freshman. I'm sure he'll be fine, and I'm sure he'll find it. How quickly will he find it? Will it be a 2-month thing? This has been a weird year also. Will it take him longer, shorter? We don't know. So it's such a big question mark. He'll be an effective player at the college level, there's no question. And I think eventually he'll be a star. But when is the question, and when does that develop? And how do the other guys developing and getting better? Are they so much better from last year that it keeps him on the bench a little more than we think? I mean, there are so many factors that go in here. It's just hard to say. But I will say that Christian Lander, you watch him and you watch his film, and it's a guy who is a next level point guard, something that Indiana doesn't really have right now. I mean, and by next level point guard, I mean an NBA point guard. He's a kid that has every ability to go to the NBA and be an effective point guard on the level of the top guys. So that's something that Rob Phinisee, when he's right, is a good Big Ten point guard. You're not looking at him and being like, oh, that guy's going to play in the NBA and do really well. You're saying that guy could make the NBA and be on a team. Whereas Lander, you're talking about that guy's going to lead an NBA team at some point. So there's just different levels when you're considering these guys.
Yeah, I think the Lander one is the most interesting, and maybe because it's the one that we know the least about what it'll really look like. I think if he's able to translate well and translate quickly, then I think he becomes hands down the answer to this, because he's able to play at a pace that other guys aren't able to play at, if that's true. He shoots it well enough based on what you've seen to provide some floor spacing, and he's a guy who can really make plays for others, which is what this team has lacked. So if that transition is a smooth one for him, then I think we look back at this discussion and feel like it probably wasn't that much of a question, but it's really the unknown part of him. So, well, let's circle back to Trayce Thompson. I'm a little surprised, given the two of you, that neither of you has stumped harder for Trayce in this discussion. So, Ryan, as the chairman of the Trayce Thompson fan club, I mean,
I think
where do you think he fits into the discussion?
I think he's incredible. I think he's incredibly important to this team. I also think that with Trayce Jackson-Davis healthy as one of your two guys who definitely has to be healthy, he covers a little bit of what Race does, and you need a guard as well to stay healthy, or a perimeter player, and that's why I picked Jerome. But there's no question that he is wildly important to this team, and he's got to stay healthy this year. There's no question of that.
Yeah, Coach, what about you with Race?
I think he might. I mean, all the starters are important, but you can make a really big argument because I just really think he's going to be a key athletically in the post, guarding the 4, maybe guarding the 5 if you want TJD to step out. I think this is year 4 for him in the system. I think you're just going to see an outstanding year for him. I'm not predicting all Big Ten or anything like that, but I think he's at a point where he can really maximize his ability, and that just means a lot for Indiana. And I like the way he rebounds. I like his hustle plays, and that's hard to replace sometimes. But But the second most indispensable, it's a guards game. The college and pro game, it's a guards game. And so we already have one post player that's indispensable. We got to throw it over to the guard. The other thing that I was going to mention about Jerome, Ryan mentioned that right off the bat, is he's the highest recruited player other than Lander and TJD, correct? He'd be the third highest on the roster. So there's that potential. He had the injury. He came back last year. Can he reach that top 60, I believe, potential? That then becomes very important too, because you can be a decent player and work hard and buy in and the culture and all that stuff we love about the Indiana recruits lately, but talent wins out sometimes too. And Jerome's, the third quote most talented player per ranking if you go by it. And if he maximizes that, that's hard to replace too. But I just think we're at a point where these guys have developed and they're all important. And they're all important not only individually, but they're also important because of the pieces that Archie has put together. They're all indispensable to some extent. But, Race is going to have a good year, and we're better with them than without them, that's for sure.
So I think what you said about Jerome, I think is what this argument ultimately boils down to, right? I mean, Jared picked Al because he's the one that we know the most about. We've actually seen do it. Anybody else that's on this list, we're projecting based on seeing it in flashes and in spurts, but not for consistent stretches. The same thing can be said of all these. I mean, Lander, we haven't seen at the college level at all, but Jerome, we've seen things that we want to like and say, hey, he's a really good shooter. And I think shot form wise, he is. There's a lot of good things about that, but the reality is he shot 31% from 3 last year. And then you say that about Race, and it's like, can he do what he's been able to do in some of these spot roles as a starter or in an expanded role? Maybe, but we haven't seen it. And Finney, we talk about the Michigan State games, but we don't talk about the other games where he hasn't been at the forefront of what's going on. So I think that's ultimately what the argument kind of boils down to, and probably why Jared landed on Al, because at least you've got a guy who's proven that he can knock down 3-pointers. So we talk about other guys being able to space the floor. Like, he's shown an ability to do that. And so it's a little bit of, at least with Al, you kind of know what you're going to get out of him. And then there's the intangibles that you mentioned, Coach. And it's like, it just becomes a matter of how much value you place on what you've actually seen and the intangibles versus what you think these other guys are going to be. And I think that's what makes it a discussion. If it was truly what they'd accomplished, it would be Al hands down. If it's what you think they can be, then the other guys really come into play. And that's where Lander becomes a really intriguing answer to the question if he does it that way. So I think that's ultimately just kind of batting this around for a little bit, feels like where the answer lies. So after all that debate, Ryan, you said Jerome at first. Is that who you're sticking with, or have you been swayed by any of the arguments otherwise?
No, I think his ability to spread the floor and open up things for everybody else is what makes him very important.
Coach, what about you? Where do you what's your final answer on the topic, if you will?
I'm gonna be swayed to Jerome simply because there are other players who can take Rob's place. I actually think Rob is really, really, really important and would have been my answer. But when Ryan brought it to who can replace, it's really hard to replace the 3-4 position. Geronimo would have to really step up and do some things, in my opinion. So I'm going to go Jerome Hunter.
All right. And I don't know. I almost swayed myself to Al through some of the, like, what have you actually seen? I almost swayed myself to Lander by thinking the absolute best of what can be there. I think I'm going to settle on Lander. The argument for Al for me is, again, it goes back to the whole potential thing, and there's so many off seasons in a row. I don't know how many, well, probably all of them, quite frankly, but where we talk ourselves into the idealized version of everybody, and we kind of at least know what you're getting with Al. But I'm going to go against that and talk myself into the idealized version of a guy that has never played a college basketball game, say Christian Lander. Because if he's at his best, and he and the recruiting experts and all the scouting reports are right about his ability to really be a next level point guard, that becomes incredibly indispensable on a team that has really lacked that. So that's an absolute projection of what that could be. But I guess I'll settle in on him and go against what I said we probably should not do, which is think about the idealized version of people. So yeah, what are you going to do? What fun is it if you just get stuck in what you already know? We're dying for anything at this point. So we might as well go all in once again, as we always do about these guys. So all right, with that we'll wrap up that debate, and in our third segment we're going to answer your questions. So stick with us here on the Assembly Call.
This is Jordan Halls, and I never miss a shot or an episode of the Assembly Call.
Thank you, Jordan, and welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm Andy Bottoms, here with Coach Brian Tonsoni and Ryan Phillips. Remember, you need to be subscribed to our email newsletter. We send out a weekly IU news roundup, even during the offseason, and after every game, we send out a detailed post-game analysis. Look forward to actually having some games, hopefully, to send those analyses out after. Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. That's IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. Time now for our mailbag. All questions were submitted via our private IU basketball discussion community, which you can learn more about at assemblycall.com/community. First question comes from Julie. Opinions regarding the rumored Thanksgiving start to the season. What effect would that have? No students is the obvious one. We touched on this a little bit just in terms of where some of these events would get held. But Coach, other thoughts on potentially starting the season then? Other complications that maybe we didn't mention? What's the biggest thing that would be missing? Just your general reaction to, hey, this is when it would start and how you feel.
Yeah, the biggest thing from a coach's perspective is you don't want to have a condensed, jammed-in season where you're playing so many games back to back or a day off. Remember when the Big Ten played in Washington, D.C., and they lost a week and had to play the Big Ten tourney early, and they had so many games. As a coach, you like to have rest and you like to have preparation. So, what's the schedule going to look like would be if they are going to push it back to a Thanksgiving start and you lose those 2 or 3 weeks. You mentioned it, Andy. Are you going to pick up right there and start the season and condense it, or are you going to chop off some games? But I would lobby for making sure we have enough time in between games and you don't play, 5 games in 10, 11 days trying to make up games. Have a season, but have it so that you can rest and prepare within the shortened season.
So Ryan, outside of Maui potentially moving to Asheville, North Carolina, what are the biggest challenges you would see of starting the season at that point?
Honestly, I think that's probably the right time to do it. I think that, again, no students on campus. You have a chance to really shrink the circle that players are involved in. I think that obviously the issue is condensing the season, and if you're going to try and fit in non-conference games, that's the issue. I do think you need to start playing before January 1st, though, to get everything in. Otherwise, you're compressing that massive conference season into a calendar year. And also, we don't know, as you mentioned earlier, we don't know, are they going to move the tournament back? Are they going to, schedule conference tournaments all the same week instead of spreading them out over 2 weeks as they've done before and things like that. There's so many variables we don't know, but I think a November start sort of makes sense. I know the Pac-12 has said they're not playing anything until January 1st, but again, these conferences make these rulings and statements, and then they're sort of like, well, things look a little better. Maybe we could move it a little earlier. I mean, the students are on campus and practicing anyway to some degree. They could probably move that start date up or back or whatever. I think aiming for Thanksgiving or around that week seems like the most logical way to do things for basketball.
Yeah, I think the part
we're
about
also
this...
going to clarify, we're also going to have football as an example for basketball. And what happens with football, if it's played, you're going to get to see, okay, well, no, maybe we should move it back because of these factors, X, Y, Z. Basketball has the benefit of that.
Yeah, Julie also mentioned no students being there. I think anything with crowds is probably not going to happen anyway. So I don't know that that's going to be
not until 2021.
No matter when you started, I'm not sure that does a whole lot. I think it's to me, it's a lot of the stuff we talked about at the beginning is how you handle the non-conference piece will be a big tipping point. I think both from a selection and seeding standpoint, but also just from a preparation standpoint. Coach talked about, whoever draws the opening Big Ten game, first game of the season trip to the Breslin Center is probably not going to be too psyched about that and how you kind of work through those things. But if you get into a conference only season and, Big Ten goes full round robin and you play 26 game league schedule and do that, maybe that's what it ends up being. So I don't know, but that could be odd for sure. Next one from Lee. He talked about being depressed about the live sports scene. Watching MLB with fake crowd noise and cardboard cutouts of fans is different for sure. Is this the future of all sports? I don't know that I want to go down the dark place of whether this is the future of all sports, but just thought it'd be a good chance to get you guys' thoughts on, what some of these different leagues are doing, whether it be the virtual fans or the piped in noise or different stuff like that. So Ryan, I'll throw that to you first. I mean, what if those things have kind of hit the mark for you and been okay and added to your enjoyment of it versus the ones that have been like, I could probably do without this?
I haven't minded the cutouts. I've minded that when they did the virtual fans, like in baseball
on Fox, like when they did baseball. Yeah, that was terrible. That might be
terrible.
The worst thing that I saw. Yeah.
Look, people are trying to make the best of a bad situation. So I don't mind the cutouts. I don't mind the stuffed animals. I think the stuffed animals are a win for everybody. Collect them at the end of the season, clean them, and then, donate them to a kids charity or ask people to purchase them for a kids charity and raise money. It's a win-win for everybody. The virtual fans in the NBA thing has been fine. Like, the too much crowd noise is probably too much. It's probably a bit much, but having that like sort of low hum of crowd noise is like a white noise in the background, I think has been good. No, I don't think this is the future of all sports, though. I think that we're going to look back at this in a few years as a quaint time when we dealt with stuff, and we're going to look back at it. Can you believe they had cardboard cutouts in the state? People are making the best of a bad situation, and I applaud them for their efforts, even if some of them have fallen a bit short.
Coach, what about you?
Yeah, I'm glad sports are back. It's been a long time without them. I do miss watching them with fans. There's just another energy, and there's just juice to sports. That's why we like sports. I miss being there. Also, correct myself. It was the New York City Garden trip that condensed the schedule, not the Washington, D.C. Big Ten. So I want to make sure that I correct my error. But, yeah, it's better than nothing, and I will take it. It's going to be weird watching, college football and college basketball without fans, and it hurts home court and home field advantage. So there is some seriousness to that. But the fake crowd noise on some of these stadiums, I have to mute the TV. It gets a little too loud in the baseball stadiums. So maybe that's just an age thing. I don't know.
I would say the Reds' inability to hit has really been the biggest detractor for me for my enjoyment of sports over the last little while.
There was a big walk-off the other night, and you just heard the players are the only ones celebrating, and that was kind of weird. Like, it was echoing in the stadium, It was kind of odd.
Yeah, some of it would be interesting. I think when you think about football and what that's going to sound like and how much more of that noise you pick up, you hear a little bit of it in the NBA stuff. So I think some of it is kind of cool and makes it a little bit more to use the word you said earlier, Ryan, quaint, but I'm kind of like you. I find it hard to get too upset about any of it when everybody's just trying. It's not like anybody knows how to produce a game during these scenarios and do different things like that. So everybody's intentions are good, even though some of these things have maybe missed the mark and that you wouldn't want to. But like I said, I think we'll take what we can get at this point.
That's it. We're done. No more questions.
All right, and with that, we'll wrap up tonight's edition of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Special thanks to Bob Thompson for producing most of the music you heard on the show. And thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next Thursday night. Until then,
take it from me, Juwan Morgan. Keep your elbows in, eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
So I will say we did have one question that we didn't quite get to because I didn't think we'd be able to do it justice. But Phil sent in a question to Coach. Where do you find the outstanding guests for one-on-one with Coach Tonsoni? Phil was one of the guests, so he probably knows where you found him. But I did want to give, and we'll throw this on the podcast. But I know, Coach, you've done released two of these so far. I believe I've got them queued up to try to listen to. I've had too many meetings at work to actually be able to listen to them this week. But I know Jared, sent us a text about how great they were. So any big kind of takeaways or your impressions from doing the first couple, aside from, where you find the fantastic guests?
Yeah, well, it's called One-on-One with Coach, and I decided that members of our fan community that are members that want to talk about their Indiana fandom, that I would interview them for 20, 25 minutes about how they got started and what it means to be an Indiana fan. And so the idea just popped, and these people get a hold of me, so they're very anxious of telling their story. And Phil paid me some money. No, Phil was a great interview. Didn't send me any side money or anything, but I will take it, Phil, if you're listening. So, but I have two. We have two that are out in the community. I've also interviewed two that are in production. They're just waiting to go out once a week, and it's just it was just an idea, and I didn't know how many people would want to. I have two more scheduled, and hoping to just continue this for a while and let people tell their story. And it's just been fantastic. And you always hear the story about how older people live vicariously through younger people. Well, I'm living vicariously through a couple of these older fans that we followed. Phil was a student, a freshman in 74, 75. So his first 2 years on campus, they lost one basketball game. And, that's kind of crazy.
Good.
And then
it's good timing. They say timing is everything. That's pretty good on Phil's part there.
Yeah. And the other guy's talking about the Van Arsdales, watching them play and in the old field house. That's stuff that I didn't get to experience. So it's really cool. But the best thing is to allow people to tell their story. And you could just see the love of Indiana basketball in the four people that I've talked to already, and it was a fun thing to fall into. So if you're interested in part of the community, my email is on my bio in the Hoosiers fan community. Send me an email and we'll schedule a time and we'll talk about how you became a IU fan. The one that's coming out next was a lady who was on campus. She was a year behind me on campus. So a lot of people who want to talk were down there around championship. So far, I think everyone that I've talked to either was in there before the championship in the 60s or was down there in 76 or 87. So a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, I definitely plan to listen tomorrow, so everybody check those out. Probably not going to be getting a lot of interest from people who were there for the early Crean years. I wouldn't imagine, but never know. You never know.
He's come up a couple times, always in Archie needs time to build things kind of mode from the fans. So
of course.
I think maybe we brainwash them or something.
That cannot be ruled out. Cannot be ruled out for sure. So, all right. Well, we appreciate everybody being here, hanging out with us tonight, and some combination of us will be back next week. If anybody has topic ideas, I feel like we're officially struggling with that, as if we probably weren't
scraping
before.
The bottom of the barrel.
So we've broken down every player. We've done talked about the coaching. We've done whatever else. So
we would normally have done a schedule thing by now, right? But that's just on hold. They haven't officially announced it because they're probably gonna. Yeah,
because I don't think there's enough where we could at least kind of talk about what that might mean from a bracketology standpoint. So yeah, if anybody's got good topic ideas, we're open. So, but again, appreciate everybody else, guys. Good talking to you, and we will
stay safe, everyone.
Yep, we will talk to everybody next week.
Bye, guys.
All right, thanks.